What does leverage mean and why should I build it? This question I find is something that people often get stuck on quite easily, and it seems quite abstract. But in reality, it's actually the only way that you can make sure that the work you're doing can continue to be done, because work seems to constantly expand the container that holds it. The more capacity you add to a team, the more capacity you add to yourself, the more hours you put into a day, it will constantly expand. So there's a concept here that allows you to work against the reality of ever growing complexity. And that's essentially what leverage is for. So if you want to make your work sustainable long term, you need to understand leverage so you can understand when you are building it and when you're actually hurting your own leverage. And today I'm going to work through with you how exactly to spot that, what it looks like, areas you can look for to build leverage, because it's not always a simple case. And we're going to have fun. Something to watch out for, of course, is not knowing how to build leverage in your team. Not only slows down your team, it actually leads to burnout of a whole team, burnout of an individual. And those are different things, right? The team loses motivation to work on something interesting, but then the individuals and their health starts to suffer when this is not taken into account and done correctly. So we're going to take a look at that today. The first concept I think you need to understand as we begin to explore what leverage is the concept of ROI. A lot of people have very abstract conversations around ROI, treat it as a buzzword, but it's actually just a simple exchange, right? You put some money into a machine, a system, a process, and you get more money out afterwards, right? So are you turning €5 into 15? That's a positive ROI. Or are you turning €10 into 5? That's a very negative return on investment, right? So in general, I think the way to think about this is anything you do, if you're putting in effort and you're not getting multiples more out of it at the end, you didn't have something with a return on investment. Now, that investment could be value to the customer, but it could also be value to yourself. And we're going to look more at that value to yourself and your team side of things and explore what that looks like. So the first thing I want you to understand is think about this with just basic levers out of, just regular mechanical physics, right? Simple stuff. They teach this in grade 9. You have a lever and you put some effort somewhere like here, and you have a load that you want to move over here. And the question is it an effective way to move that load? In this case, this is a very poor way to move this load. Something you could do if you are very strong, but it's not very effective, right? Versus something over here, like a common seesaw style, it's in the fulcrum is in the middle. The effort, you get an equal amount on both sides, right? So the effort to lift something is kind of equal to the effort put in. Or take a look at this one down here, right? This is kind of how a shovel works. So, you have here the fulcrum, that's your one hand, and you push back on the back handle of the shovel. And then, you have the load that you want to pull out of the, in this case, that would be the dirt, right? The dirt that you lift with a shovel. So something interesting to think about already is, where do you place the effort? Where's the fulcrum? And what kind of task is being done, right? Look at this one, a shovel and a broom, right? So you're sweeping something with a broom. The fulcrum here, unlike the shovel, it's actually your backhand, and you're doing most of the movement and the effort here in the middle of it. And the load you're moving is way over at the end. And, this would be something that makes absolutely no sense. And same with this one here, right? But these are all things that you could do, prying at a wedged in rock with a crowbar between, something in a rock to try and lift it out of a hole. You could do it this way as well, where this is, something you're pushing against and this is the thing you want to move. And then we have more things that just don't make too much sense, right? Is the fulcrum here and the load is here. So again, the point is some of these are quite silly and lead to you putting in multiples more effort to get the job done versus something like this, where getting the job done could be quite easy. And it's not a simple matter of, I picked the best practice fulcrum, every time it's perfect. Actually, you have different ones for different situations, right? So in different situations, you will want to apply effort in different places. You will want to move the fulcrum in different places to get the job done. And it could be that when you enter into a scenario, you find that everybody is working like this here in the middle, right? Putting in tons and tons of effort in a place that really doesn't make sense. And this is the key concept, right? So when we're putting in our leverage and making sure we do have leverage, we want to make sure we're working in a system where we're not spending €1,000 to try and win 500. And you see this quite a lot, right? It's do we play to win or do we play to play, right? There's a lot of just conversations around that. The barrier to entry is low, or we need to do this to enter into some sort of case. But we don't have a conversation around what it takes to get the whole job done, right? We're not having those conversations in terms of total return on investment. And having this conversation, understanding, there's different situations, different tools, and different things you need to move, right? Are you moving the effort you put in? That's muscle, your raw effort. Or are you changing the design of the system? Are you changing the way that the whole thing works so that you can actually move the thing you need to move, right? So this is the first thing to think about. Now, here's the second thing I want you to think about. And if you know theory of constraints, this should be familiar to you. If you haven't read a book called The Goal, you should go read that book. Think about this, right? We in most of our product engineering organizations are basically flowing changes, right? And this is flow of value to a customer, right? So we have ideas, needs, and problems, and they go through some kind of process and it comes out as customer value, hopefully. Now, it could be that this process here cost €1,000 per increment and the value received is 500. You have a negative ROI on that situation. Or it could also be that this process cost €500 and the value coming out of that is 1,000. So you have a positive return on investment. This is a way to think about it, right? Individual units of work kind of streaming through your process. The problem is reality rarely looks like this, right? Reality, this is kind of implying that there's no deviation in capacity, in workload as it goes through stages, because there's hidden stages here, right? So it's, you have some discovery work, some evidence building, prototyping, delivery, working on the software, getting that thing in production, collecting feedback. And what's even missing from this diagram is actually showing the ongoing cost of owning and evolving a piece of technology, right? But the flow of change is the thing that we need to think about here. Reality doesn't look like this. Usually, reality will look something like this, right? The capacity in your process somewhere gets constrained, right? So there's a constraint. And this could be something like your CI/CD pipeline requires the whole company to line up and wait to do deploys. So you might be lining up, if you want to do a deploy every month, 5 developers waiting in a Slack channel somewhere saying, who's got the deploy queue today? And as you scale up your company from 3 teams to 5 teams to 15 teams, this bottleneck gets worse and worse because we're trying to add in more and more and more items. And the back pressure on that constraint is so high that the whole system kind of responds. And, we say, okay, well, we have such trouble deploying. Let's do something else. Instead of deploying once a week, let's deploy once a month. Instead of deploying once a month, let's deploy once a quarter. So you have a back pressure there that actually it ruins your ability upstream to execute because we did not address that bottleneck. The bottleneck might not be your CI/CD pipeline. This could be your ability to experiment and discover, your production outages. This could be many, many things. This could simply be, and probably is not, the speed of typing on a keyboard. Probably not the case, but just keep your mind open about the bottleneck could be in places that you didn't think about. And what we often see is a lot of effort going in to improve other things, right? And so this is one of the things you'll commonly see. A big trap is, management wants these ideas to get converted into this value, right? And so just a very common mistake here is, well, we're not getting any value out of that stuff, at least not a high enough output in terms of, or at least not a high enough outcome, right? We're not getting the output. We're definitely not getting the outcomes fast enough. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to hire more people to think about parallel topics, and we're going to horizontally expand our business into other things. The problem that often happens is all of those parallel concepts are pushed through the same bottleneck. And like I said above, we increase the pressure here. We actually made it worse, right? We actually made that problem worse because there's such a high back pressure. There's this one scene in Three Stooges where they're all trying to get through the door at the same time. Instead of just walking through one at a time, they all kind of step on each other, right? So we made the thing worse. And so, this is one thing, like let's increase the amount of software being written. Let's increase the amount of discovery projects going on. Let's increase the number of customer calls we have. We spent money on that. And then we also spent a bunch of money on the backside of that, right? We said, let's increase stuff after our bottleneck, and let's assume our bottleneck here is CI/CD pipeline. We spend money on increasing our diagnostics tools of production, finding out what's going on, increasing our tools to find out about customer experience in production, increasing time to do all kinds of activities on the later half of that, right? And what was the point, right? We have such a slow change rate after the bottleneck that it doesn't really matter too much, right? So think about that. So just again, right? So think about leverage, and then think about, where are you actually moving the fulcrum in your system? Where are you applying your effort? Are you applying it where it actually matters? It's one of the common traps. It's you say we need to prioritize a project, so we say let's get a 2x2. Let's find the things that are high effort, low effort, high impact, low impact, and then we pick the ones that are the high impact, low effort. Say, okay, those are my quick wins. Those are my low hanging fruit, and we're going to build a bunch of low hanging fruit. But it turns out the low hanging fruit's here. It did not matter. It's an elaborate way to waste money and time inside of your business instead of addressing the thing that will actually increase the throughput and bandwidth of your whole organization. So this is actually the model you should be using, not the 2x2 of effort versus impact and effort, right? So this is the way to think about where you should be putting your constraints. So I want to show you a short tour of places to look, because this is quite abstract, right? This is deeply abstract, and I just want to give you a little bit more direction on where you can look to actually figure out, am I making efforts in the right place? Think about this one, platforms. A lot of people misunderstand platform team when they hear platform, and I always have to address this. I'm sorry if you already know, but platform is not the team that says, hey, I'm going to do all of your infrastructure as code for you. I'm the team that's going to manage your cloud services and your production infrastructure. Platform is a concept that says basically we are going to, as an abstract capability, offering something usually as a service to another team so that the mission of that team is simplified, right? And I think the easiest one here, let's say this team here belongs to a platform, is offering emailing capabilities. Now, a lot of libraries and third-party SaaSes do that job, but just for the sake of explanation, let's talk about email. Email is actually much more complicated than it sounds. You have to think about what email protocols are you using? Is it a POP3 server? How do I send the STMP message? How do I authenticate with the right host? How do I format things for the spam rules? How do I do message retry? How do I receive email? How do I, all these things? How do I comply with the GDPR privacy laws, do not spam me laws, block listing emails? How do I do that? It's a lot of complexity that is not necessarily germane. It's not part of the mission of that team above, right? And let's say this team above is something like sending a newsletter, right? So sending a newsletter is different from all of that complexity. They do need a way to say, here's the content, the recipient, the title, the email body, but they can abstract away 90% of that complexity by putting that into a platform stream. And this stream is free to think about just the newsletter topics, right? So in this way, you've done something, you've built leverage in your organization to actually let this team have a reduced cognitive load, right? There's less stuff in their minds they have to take care of. There's less software they have to own and maintain. And we've put that into another team. And I think that's the important thing here is we've taken away the cognitive load, but we did not take away the need from the user need from being served, right? The platform team is not taking the user need with it, right? So if the user need is something like, I need to read an email, we're not saying this team is responsible for the emails and we have a handover. This team here works on some software and then they hand it over for this team to do part 2 of that project. This is the trick. If it's a true platform team and not just a handover, is you're taking away the complexity to service a user need. You're not taking away the user need. So that's one thing. Another way, like let's say you're not solving this from an organizational concept, you're solving this from a inside of the team level. And you have these, and this is a Wardley map, by the way, very good tool to think about lots of different things. Let's say we have a capability here, right? So in a Wardley map, this would represent a capability such as send an email or send a newsletter. And what we're saying here is we have things that are along the evolution of product maturity. Is it at its genesis stage, brand new, very complicated, very bespoke? Is it kind of custom built? Is it at the level of being a product or a rental? Or is that the level of a commodity? So something like these authentication services out there, right? So you can go to a lot of auth systems, plug it in as a third-party vendor to your system and say, okay, you're going to handle my OAuth for my entire enterprise. That's presently, I would say, like right here, possibly even here, right? So when you look at it, it's actually very, very easy to implement OAuth as a third-party app. It's almost a utility, like electricity out of the wall. It's a little bit of a product and a rental, but it's somewhere between that, because when you look at the broader scope of OAuth providers, it's just so easy to get access to that stuff. Now, that wasn't the case. I remember the first time I was trying to implement OAuth, this is like at least a decade ago. It was very messy. There were all kinds of little hacks you had to build. Some libraries supported it. They had issues with, lots of security issues. That technology has been honed, evolved, maintained, simplified to a state like this. So it's possible in your own team to evolve the concept to a point where the cognitive load of owning that system is quite low, right? So that's one way to handle, building leverage in your team, is saying, how do I simplify the concept in a way that reduces the cognitive load of maintaining that system? Something for us to think about. And another way we could do that in our teams is actually a little bit, it's a mix of technology, product, and process, actually. And it's a way to think about architecture conventions, architecture standards, architecture, whatever you want to call it inside of your organization. Here, I've taken a screenshot from Ice Panel. And what's nice about this is it gives you, an interactive view of how many things in your company are wired together across multiple teams. And it gives you, a shared and documented understanding of the system. So the cognitive load to go through your system is lower because you've augmented the understanding, you've shared the understanding in a simple to understand system where I can see, okay, front end's connecting to, these 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 systems. So if I'm going to change my front end, I need to be worried about change coupling with those. Versus the email service, it's actually coupled. I got the customer up there, and then I've got this gRPC thing in the middle. For my checkout service. So actually, I could probably change email and only impact my checkout service. It gives me, in seconds, I can understand this system that I've never worked on, right? So shared and documented understanding of the system builds leverage. This is fun. This is an emoji for Slack. Whenever somebody has a really good idea to improve the process, you can actually just say, RFC, please, please bring this to the architecture committee, council, board, whatever you call it in your organization, where you discuss improving standards. And I think a lot of people misunderstand the purpose of those teams. It's not a way to debate. I mean, you can debate system design there. This is quite useful. But one of the chief functions should be setting the guardrails in your organization for how we do things, right? And you don't need to set all the guardrails. You almost need to figure out what's the paved roadway for normal. But this is one way to do it, right? Just having an RFC process that improves the standards of how we do things. And we can even go further is, those RFCs might evolve into, written agreements about how we write code, right? So in this case, it's like we're going to use an instance provider, and it's going to look like this, and it's going to be used, this way in our code. And it's just an agreement, and it simplifies the work, right? These are the common way to do things. That's the golden path to get things done. So those three are ways you can build leverage on top of product and technology concerns. There are other concerns, right? A lot of these things are not limited to how do we make our product, how do we make our technology. A lot of the time, and I only have a few examples for this because I'm planning on doing much more content on all of these things. We often have things for our process and for our people that end up being the constraint on getting outcomes in our business, right? So ticket tracking boards. How do we interact? How do we delegate out work? How do we get things done? What's the process on that? There's, this infinite debate on how do we organize our ticket tracking board. A lot of people misunderstand, this is really just project management software, right? It's malleable. There's no perfect way to do it. Just like we said over here on the left, remember, there are different problems, right? If you are trying to shovel some dirt with a broom, it's going to be very ineffective. And again, if you're trying to use a shovel as a broom, it's also going to be quite ineffective. So there's no perfect process for that. You have to really, kind of sense what's the situation I'm in. How do I set up my project management to track that the things are getting done? do I want to do that in the first place? What is necessary? What's not necessary and just somebody's dogma? Thinking about this usually unlocks a lot of stuff. Something I've introduced here is leftwards planning. It's a project planning methodology that focuses on very, very short term increments and tries to get the work done in a way that as many people as possible can share the workload and not introduce a lot of additional complexity, right? So it's just a way to do that, and then think about, the types of meetings, how they're run, when they're run. If you only have, for instance, a product refinement, once a week and it's not effective and you're not getting the domain knowledge in there, could be that your bottleneck over here is not, how quickly can my developers type on our keyboards. It could actually be how quickly and accurately and aligned can they get with the discovery work that was possibly done up here, understanding the user needs, right? If it's something like we're only communicating through Jira tickets, that's probably a bottleneck through the conceptual handover, right? So how are you actually running your team, right? This is not obvious, but it could be that your process is your bottleneck and not the technologies you're working with and not the tech debt and these other things. And one last thing to think about here is actually people topics, right? So career level expectations, how do those work? Are people actually incentivized in order to, eliminate the bottleneck? Is there actually a bottleneck because of career level expectations? And these could be written down. It could also be informal. So in one company I've seen, the chief technology officer said, let's get everything into microservices. And there was somehow, in a strange way, an unspoken kind of expectation that the first person who's leading a team and their team delivers a microservice in this company, they'll get a big promotion or a bonus or cookie points for their next promotion or something nice. How we set that, and that could lead to a lot of competitive behaviors where everybody's trying to competitively build the first microservice. So you have a bottleneck in terms of, do we have generative behaviors where people build on each other? That's also here generative culture, right? Are people standing on the shoulders of each other, pulling each other up to the next level, or are they working in silos, not sharing, competing for the wrong reasons, right? So with generative culture, we end up having an environment where people are supporting each other quite a lot, but they're also doing their best to actually lift other people above themselves. And they're seeking for ways to work together on different projects. That's a different kind of culture than many other organizations have. You can think about training as well. I've seen a lot of projects where you have a lot of things set correctly. You have, empowerment, delegation, autonomy figured out. You have the right career level expectations, but the way they go in and write the software is just a mess and it's too challenging to maintain. So doing the training there could be the thing that unlocks a lot of value. It could also be training on non-technical skills, right? Not just, product management skills for everyone. It could also be project management skills, which I think is a little bit controversial right now because everybody thinks project means taking on a massive project, but it could be, think about this, right? Kanban is simply a project management tool. So if you're using any type of ticket tracking system, you are de facto using a project. Just how do you manage that correctly on the small scale, on the day-to-day, right? How does that work? Are things not changing correctly because the type of feedback people get is not correct? So for instance, in the book Radical Candor, the author describes, the best kind of feedback here is ones that care personally and challenge directly, right? So are we having feedback where you come to somebody who has done something that they need some feedback on and you talk to them as if you're their friend, basically providing feedback in a way that connects to them personally about something important to them, important to you, and coming from empathy, right? The other approach there is ruinous empathy, right? So they've done something wrong and you're not challenging them, directly, you're actually protecting them from even being challenged in the first place, right? So it's like, hey, yeah, I saw you didn't get that thing. And in the back of your mind, it's because the way they communicated was the wrong way. It's the type of software they wrote was the wrong thing. The type of discovery work they've done was wrong. This is ruinous empathy, right? So it's like, I'm going to pretend to be empathetic, or at least I'm going to be empathetic with you, but I'm not going to help you understand what's wrong, right? So this is a problem. And, obnoxious aggression, you have this a lot in software. It's like, jerks who are correct. So it's like they might know something. It's like, hey, you've written the software incorrectly. And they, swear at you, or they seem to actually not really care about you, even if they do care about you, just the way they present their arguments, right? So stuff like this seems to a lot of people in tech, and I understand, can seem like it's not relevant to getting work done when you feel like, if I just had the CI/CD bottleneck solved. But it could often be like, hey, code review is not happening correctly. Our quality of our software is dropping because we have the wrong kind of feedback culture when we're reviewing the code of one another. When we're having discussions about architecture, we didn't challenge directly because, we either didn't know how to give that feedback or we didn't have the culture where we could give that feedback. Like something's wrong. This can be something where building leverage on people will help you significantly. Another misunderstanding very often here is like empowerment, delegation, autonomy, all these kinds of buzzwords you hear managers talk about quite frequently. And I'm one of them. A lot of people misunderstand empowerment. They think empowerment means, being a cheerleader for your team. It's like going, rah, rah, sis, boom, bah, you got this team. I totally trust you. But that's not what this means, right? This means empowerment, right? So empowerment, think about that power. Think about a toaster, right? Simple toaster. You want to toast some bread. It's not effective to empower your toaster by saying, you're a good toaster. I trust you. You know all the right things. You're so good at toasting. I've seen you toast before. You're going to do this. And you turn around and you wonder like, why didn't it toast anything? And it's because you didn't plug it into the wall. You didn't pay your electricity bill, right? Something is fundamentally missing to enable them to be empowered, right? Delegation, right? Did you actually hand down the right level of scope to them? Are you trusting them with the right autonomy? All these things can create that kind of constraint that prevents you from getting the outcomes you need, right? And it ends up being situations where you have to muscle your way through to get anything done, right? So think about this, right? Think about all the things we talked about here. You cannot muscle through systemic cognitive load. There are some cases where, the cognitive load is short-term bursts and muscling through it is a possible strategy that will work and doesn't come back to bite you. I think even 10% of the time is a little bit optimistic. Generally speaking, the cognitive load will continuously expand. And that's because any software system we maintain needs to continuously evolve over time. The environment we're in gets more complicated. Not just, the market, but the business, the way you operate in the company, everything gets more complicated. Just saying like, I'm just going to push through and get this done. Very few things actually fit into a class where that's effective. You have to figure out, how do we change the way things are happening so that we can bring down the overall complexity of what's going on in our situation. Building leverage lets you operate on a higher level than before. So if you build leverage correctly, you're going to be putting in, the same amount of money and getting more out of it. And it's not just about market value. It could also just be, the time your team has available for it. You can run further, you can lift more, you get more stuff done to a higher quality. Like all these things are signs that you've elevated the team to a higher level, right? Cognitive load decrease. That should be a really good indicator that you've built leverage. So every time you do it, it should be better than a one-to-one trade-off, right? If it's an equivalent exchange of just putting in the effort and getting the rewards, you're just muscling through something. And in fact, if you're putting in the effort and it's worse than that, you're definitely not addressing the constraint, right? You're making the system worse somehow or wasting resources. So think about your leverage in terms of, technology and product, process and people. Those are the categories of activities I walked you through, right? So I said product and technology, process, people. And remember, I said I'm going to release videos on these topics where I go into much more detail and expand the cases to help you understand this. Because I think building leverage is one of the most misunderstood and often missing things that create burnout in teams. And that's either through teams slowing down, teams becoming less ambitious, and then, some individuals just not being able to handle it because the stress builds up. Different ways to handle that, right? And so there's many ways to build leverage. Do not look at just one place to solve things, right? You must build it where it counts, right? Aim for the constraint. Aim for putting your fulcrum in the right place. Aim for putting your effort in the right place, right? It matters where you build it. It's not enough to simply aim for the low-hanging fruits, right? The low-hanging fruits and say like, okay, we're only going to work on that. Because if your low-hanging fruits are over here or over here, it's an absolute waste of time. And you probably have a high risk of making the situation worse. So think about these things. Like I said, I'm going to dig in a lot more into this. If you like this kind of content and you want to see more, just subscribe to the channel and you will get all of the updates. Thank you very much.